Hello again, and welcome back to the HUK podcast. My name is Rabbi Moshe Friedman. I'm here with Rabbi Ari Kayser, and today we're going to ask the question, are you happy yet? Rabbi Ari, happy yet?
If I had the answer to that question, I think I'd be a millionaire at this point.
Now, see, that's an interesting point that you're making. It's 2019. We should all be happy by now. Why is it such a big deal that if one person figures out how to become happy, we have psychological data, research, all kinds of techniques. You look up happiness as a title for a book, you're going to get 5,000 answers. So the question really is, why aren't we all happy yet?
Again, that is the question of the moment. But I think that the beginning of the answer, at least my initial thoughts, are life is complicated. And
True enough.
And not just that, like you say, yes, in thousands of years of human history, surely this, which is so important, surely we should have figured this out at this point. And I agree. But the question, I think, is a non-starter in the sense that, so much has changed about life. And therefore, what makes us happy might have changed. The way we live our lives have changed. Expectations about happiness and the way we live our life. All of these things are variables which are fluctuating throughout the centuries. So surely that would play a major role.
So you're saying I'm making the wrong assumption. I'm saying, well, happiness should be this kind of linear process of arriving at happiness throughout history. But in reality, every new generation, we have to kind of redefine what happiness is for ourselves.
Well, yes, but also I think that we're so used to, in the 21st century, aligning happiness with standard of living. And therefore, it could be that most of us think of the question in that way. Why haven't we achieved happiness at this point in the 21st century after thousands of years of human history? Because, we all know that the average person's standard of living has risen. Obviously there's people across the world who are living in dire poverty, but, as a whole, the world population,
yes,
its standard of living has increased. And therefore there's this expectation that our inner happiness is correlating to that growth in standards.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that to a certain point, a higher standard of living will bring more happiness. A person who's going from being starving or not having their basic necessities met to having their basic necessities, I'm sure you're going to get a huge spike in happiness levels. The question is, what happens from there? So you suggested that maybe we need to look at a different type of index of what defines happiness. So maybe we should just approach this from a more theoretical, rabbinical point of view, if I may say so.
Yeah,
let's try to figure out, what does happiness mean? What definition can we apply for happiness? And then maybe once we have that, then we can try to figure out how to apply it to 2019.
So I always thought that there's this great contrast between this very well-known document. You're American, you'll know it's the Declaration of Independence, which states that every individual has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Indeed.
Right? And I always found that so fascinating because the pursuit of happiness is very misleading. It's teaching us fundamentally that happiness is something that exists outside of us, something that I have to pursue, right? And why I believe that's fundamentally wrong is because I don't believe happiness exists outside of the human being. I believe that happiness is an inner human state of mind or experience, right? And I'll give you an example from the Mishnah, from the Jewish oral tradition, right? Ben Zoma, the ancient kind of teacher of the Mishnah, he said famously, who is wise? One who is happy with what he has. And that is teaching us that happiness isn't a pursuit of that which you lack, but it's an expression of that which you have. And it makes no difference how much you have. The quantity of what you have is not relevant to his teaching, but rather the quality of how you relate to what you have.
Okay, so Rabbi Ari, I'm going to, as an American, challenge you on that. Okay?
Challenge away.
And it takes a little bit of knowing what happened before that Constitution, where it says that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was actually a borrowed phrase from John Locke. You familiar with this?
No.
That John Locke originally wrote that everyone should have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. That was the original quote. And the founding fathers felt that it was necessary to change that. And to me, that signifies actually something else. Initially, there was this idea that what is a goal in life is to acquire things and to pursue things, and that will maybe, based on this comparison and based on this change in the Constitution, there was maybe that was kind of an editorial decision to say that we shouldn't be pursuing property. We shouldn't be pursuing things outside of us. We actually should be pursuing happiness. Because to me, that sounds like, well, even inner things require a process. If I want to pursue, I could still pursue inner peace. It could be that whatever the means or whatever tools I have or whatever I have right now is all I need for inner peace, but I still need to put those pieces together. I still need to come up with the right perspective in order to achieve that. So I'd still say that the pursuit of happiness doesn't mean that happiness is outside of you.
Well, I definitely think that the founding fathers, moved a step
of blessed memory.
They moved in the right direction, I would say. Listen, again, I think that John Locke was probably speaking in a time where the pursuit of property or the ability to own property was very scarce, on a mass level, and therefore, he was probably speaking to the times as well. Where being your own property owner was a big deal and had significant implications on your standard of living and on your happiness as well.
Your ability to vote and be a participant in, society as well.
100%. So I think the founding fathers moved in the right direction. But I think that the pursuit of happiness being something that is inherently detached from you. Happiness is something that you have to go to get. It means that you have to go somewhere in order to get this thing called happiness. And that's something that I'm not sure that I agree with.
And that's certainly echoed by the popular understanding maybe of that phrase. So let's take, for example, the film of that name, right? The Pursuit of Happiness, the Will Smith film, which was really just the pursuit of property. Right?
Well, it was a job, right?
It was the pursuit of a job. Exactly. So despite whatever lip service that we want to pay to saying happiness is an inner journey or whatever it is, you're still right in the sense that I think most people understand that the pursuit of happiness, in their minds, they translate it as, can I get more disposable income?
Well, it's not just disposable income. I think that things have to happen in order to make me happy.
Okay.
Right. So it's not just me having a greater salary or a paycheck at the end of the day. It means that, I need to be in a certain state of mind. I need to be inebriated. I need to be with certain people. I need to have, sunny weather. I need to be on holiday for me to be happy. So it's this mindset of things have to happen in order to make me happy, instead of saying, well, no, happiness is a state of mind that I can unlock and experience at any moment.
I see what you're saying now.
But I would ask a different question, kind of based on what we're saying, is that we're talking about happiness as a goal. But the question that I have is happiness the ultimate goal? Is happiness the thing that we are all trying to achieve? Or is happiness one of the things that are important?
I think that's very pertinent, and a lot of I would say that I've certainly had teachers who have posed this question and have answered. Your question's a leading question, because I think that the answer that you want to hear is no, and I think that that's an important thing to identify. There is a paradigm whereby we say, well, let's take it back to your pursuit of happiness, right? Well, that implicit in that right? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means that happiness is the goal.
Correct.
Happiness is the destination. Regardless of whether it's inside of us or outside of us, the pursuit of happiness is what I'm spending my life trying to do. And I've certainly asked a lot of young people, people with whom I've come into contact with, and I ask them, what's the meaning of life? What's the point of life? And usually kids who are 18 or 19 who are not so well thought out or haven't given much thought to the answer, their first answer is to be happy.
Yeah.
That's the point of life. And there is certainly a perspective that suggests that as you are alluding to, happiness is not the point of life, but what is then? So how would you answer that question? Because I think you have a certain answer in mind that you're going for here.
Well, I don't know if, I mean, this is certainly not definitive, but the reason it came up is exactly because of my deduction that happiness isn't always the goal. Because we see that we often choose things in our lives that are not directly increasing our happiness. And we do that with conscious thought. It's not something, if it was all just about happiness, then we would be totally selfish, right? We'd be very self-centered and focused on ourselves if happiness is the ultimate goal. And again, I don't actually see happiness as a goal. I see it as the process, meaning I believe happiness is a state of mind that can be accessed at any moment. And if you can access something at any moment, it makes it part of the journey, not necessarily a goal.
Okay.
But I would say that in answer to your question, that I think that meaning is more of a goal than happiness. Living a meaningful life, working towards achieving a sense of meaning and purpose and mission,
sure,
and direction. That is something that I would say overrides our immediate sense for happiness or joy.
Right. And of course, one would hope that happiness is a byproduct of that meaning.
Correct.
Right. And in addition, this is something else, kind of a flip that I've heard, which is that not only should happiness be a byproduct of deep meaning and the real goals in life, but in turn, happiness then becomes a tool to be able to do hard things and to achieve meaning. We have to have a certain base level of joy. That's fuel almost in order to get us to do hard things. Mm-hmm. We certainly know that when I'm, you say this in a very cynical way, but people talk about how they want to motivate their employees. They want their employees to be happier because happy employees work harder, right? Yeah. Well, that's true. That is true. We want to be happier because that will help us do harder things. And those the hard things in life are the ones that are meaningful and important. So, but that's not making the question of happiness irrelevant. I think that's just reframing the question of happiness. Happiness should not be the goal. However, happiness is an important part of our process. Happiness is what allows us to reach meaning. When we achieve meaning, we're being happy. So now let me kind of come at it from a different point of view, which is, now that I know that, should I still be pursuing should we still be trying to undertake what is the definition of happiness? Because I think that gives us clues as to what meaning is. If I know what happiness is, then I know the things that produce that. And if the things that produce that are of benefit to the world and to myself, then good, I should be trying to understand what happiness is as well.
Well, I think that the question really here, underlying your question, is what is happiness? Because,
yes,
is happiness the goal? Is it not the goal? Is it a byproduct of having a meaningful life? All of those things are presuming that we understand, we know what happiness is, or what we've defined what happiness is. But again, I would go back to the definition of Ben Zoma, which is that happiness is an expression of contentment with what you have. Now, that doesn't mean somebody who lacks ambition.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that I'm okay where I am, I don't need to grow, because that certainly isn't a Jewish mindset. But what he means is an acceptance and a gratefulness and a thankfulness for that which I have. And now that, again, is despite the quantity of what I have. So I would say that it's important at this stage to define what happiness is. And I would define it, for me, it makes sense based on those terms of a fulfillment with that which is my current circumstance. And that's quite a tough pill to swallow, because people will be in difficult times, and we've all been there in difficult times, whether it's financially, emotionally, whatever. And it's difficult to come to terms with and be at peace with the fact that what's happening to me now is filled with purpose and meaning to the point which I have to be grateful for it.
So I agree with you. And I think partly why I'm bothered is because I think everyone would agree with you. I think that that's such an obvious thing that everyone knows that they're supposed to be happy with what they have. We teach that to our kids. You know, one of my daughters sees the other daughter she got more Cheerios than me. Okay, you know, don't look at each other's bowls and you'll be perfectly fine with what you have. The only reason why you were upset is because you saw what somebody else had. I think everybody agrees with that. What bothers me and what has been bothering me for a long time is, why is that so hard to do?
Well,
why is that so hard to do?
Who said happiness should be easy? You know, we talk. There's a verse in the Psalms written by King David, which says, "Ivdu et Hashem besimcha," which means that one has to serve God, so to speak, besimcha, with happiness. Now, for me, the happiness is not the interesting part of the verse here. The word ivdu is. Ivdu means to work. It means struggle. It means a difficult journey. That is correlating to happiness. Happiness is something that comes through servitude, through difficulty, and it isn't something that's acquired easily. We seem to be under the impression that because everybody has a right to happiness, that therefore everybody should be able to get it and achieve it easily.
Okay.
Now that isn't something that happens, and we all know. I'll throw another cliche at you: is that, you know, the most meaningful things are things that come with difficulty. You know, the harder you work, the greater the reward. And I don't think that's untrue for happiness. Happiness is something that doesn't come easy, especially in this kind of day and age where things are changing so quickly, and it is something that we have to work out.
Yeah. So let me share a thought that I had. I spent a long time just thinking about that phrase: who is wealthy? One who's happy with their lot, right? With what they have. That seems to be one of the core definitions, or at least equations, where happiness is used. Mind you, we're not trying to define happiness in that case. We're trying to define wealth, right? Wealth is happiness divided by what you have, right? Or whatever it is. Now, to me, what I want is try to figure out was Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers, is a collection of the greatest epiphanies or deep thoughts on life, the greatest ethical intonations that these sages have left for future generations forever. So this sage, Ben Zoma, who's known as a particularly brilliant and tapped-in human being, said, you know what? I'm going to leave you with only a couple ideas. One of them is this: who's wealthy? One who's happy with their lot. And you fast forward a couple thousand years later, and someone's like, yeah, well, that's a nice bumper sticker, but what does it really mean? What's the depth of that idea? And one day it kind of clicked for me. There's a very big contradiction in what he just said. And the contradiction is as follows. If we take the equation, wealth equals, right, happiness with your lot. So we have to first, we define happiness, then we have to define lot. So there's a lot of different possibilities of happiness itself. The reason why I found your definition of happiness difficult is because you're using the definition to define what we're trying to define, right? If happiness is being grateful for what you have, well then what's that circular in terms of trying to figure out what that sentence was that Ben Zoma had. So how would we find a different definition of happiness that we could plug into who is wealthy, one who's happy with their lot? Well, what would you replace the word happy with? Because that you can't use that definition that you just used in that sentence, because that is the sentence.
It's a very good question. I think it's more than defining what happiness is. It's probably defining what wealth is.
Well, that's the sentence is defining what wealth is. So we need to know what happiness is in order to know what wealthy is.
Okay.
Now let me tell me if you agree with this or not. Okay. Happiness is marked by a sensation of being full, of being complete. Being complete. Yeah? Okay. Happiness means being complete. I don't feel like I need anything else. That's one iteration of it. But even kind of taking it on its own, imagine your happiest moments. Like, let's work backwards. Let's think experientially. What are your happiest moments? They're the moments where you're like, I would not change a single thing right now. There's so much intense joy that everything that you're doing, that you're experiencing, whether it's inside of you or outside of you, is exactly where it should be. Agree or disagree?
So you're saying that happiness is a sense of destination, of having arrived at the place where I want to be.
Well, either that, or it could be that you're in the middle of a football game, or you're in the middle of doing something that you love, right?
Okay.
So in that moment you've arrived, but you're still doing something. It doesn't have to be a static thing. Now, if that's true, that happiness is the sense of completion. Now let's plug that in. What is, in Hebrew, right, when we say you have to be happy with your lot, well, what is your lot? In Hebrew, it's chelek, right? Your chelko. What is a chelek?
It's a part or
a part or a portion, right? A fraction in Hebrew is a chelek, right? So when you plug that in, and this blew my mind, what does it mean to be wealthy? Who is wealthy? One who has a sense of utmost completion with their fraction.
Yeah.
And once I figured that out, it's like, now I understand why this is so hard to achieve. How can you feel whole with your part? That's what Ben Zoma is telling you to do.
Well, yes, I definitely hear the reframe. But again, I think that makes perfect sense.
I think it does.
Because what it's saying is that we as individuals essentially are a fraction of something bigger. Now, within that, as individuals, we are a whole. We are a whole piece in the bigger pie, so to speak. And therefore, this wealth that Ben Zoma is discussing is achieved through a recognition that I am complete as an individual, but that doesn't mean that I am everything. It means that within my uniqueness, within my completeness and purpose and mission, I am still a fraction of something much greater, whether it's all of humanity or godliness or the whole of creation, whatever it might be. But those two schisms are happening at the same time, that there is a wholeness happening, but a recognition that my wholeness is still only a fraction of something greater.
Well, that's incredible. I think that's the beginning of the answer, is that why is it so difficult for me to be grateful for what I have? Well, the answer is, it seems so arbitrary that I have this and I don't have that. Like, why? Why does that exist? There's a big contradiction inside of every human being. We are limited, finite people, but we have the potential to imagine anything and everything. We have this infinite potential within ourselves. And I have to kind of stuff that inside of time and space and deal with that. So how can I do that? Well, the answer that you're saying is, well, hold on a second. The finite time and space, you're right. You have a portion of that finite time and space. But if you're able to gain a perspective that sits above that finite portion, so then your portion is but one of many portions that all add up to a whole.
Yeah. I mean, that's very well said. I mean, and what I would add to that is that in order to achieve that, one needs a sense of humility, because the humility is a recognition that there is something greater, that there is more than meets the eye, that there is more than just my situation and my immediate circumstances. Mm-hmm. And that humility is a recognition that there's something greater, whether it's a greater purpose, a greater meaning, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call it, that there is something above, something transcendent. And I think that that's coupled with a sense of meaningfulness, because essentially, meaning is derived from a sense that there is something beyond, that there is something greater. What do you think about that?
So let's give an analogy to it, right? If you imagine that you're the sniper in the army, right? So you shouldn't lament the fact that you don't have a rocket launcher, because you understand that you are the fundamental piece of the puzzle in that army, that when you're doing your job well and everyone else is doing their job well, then you've created a perfect whole. And if you can maintain that awareness of the whole, then you're totally happy and fulfilled, and you feel a total sense of completion with that part.
Well, I mean, yeah, and you know what, that gets me thinking about something else. That I have tried to look back at moments in my life which have been the happiest moments, and I'm not talking about big events, you know, that most people would probably recall as their happiest moments, but when I have a baseline of happiness which is higher over a long period of time, and I feel very strongly that those were moments when I felt like I was living an authentic life.
Yeah.
And that authenticity is something that is totally linked with our levels of happiness. And I think that the authenticity comes with a humility of knowing who you are and the role that you play, which is like the sniper. The sniper is happy being the sniper and not having a rocket launcher or being on the front line, because he understands that he plays that vital, you know, piece in the puzzle.
Now, you're hitting on something else, though, because I think this is a good idea to always test our hypothesis with like a real life example, right? Go back to that moment where you feel completely overcome with joy. And like you said, it's not always the big, massive moments of the wedding day, which, by the way, was an incredibly intensely joyous moment.
I should hope so.
Right? Don't worry, it was. But it's also those moments where it's like, you know, you're giggling with your child, you know, or you're having a really deep conversation with a good friend, something like that, right? Now, at first blush, that doesn't seem to me like a prerequisite for that is like we first said, which is to have this transcendent experience of feeling like you're a part of a greater whole, right? Meaning it could be much more self-contained. I think a person can have a genuinely joyous moment without having that awareness that you're the sniper in the army. Yeah. So how else could we approach that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's different levels to happiness. You know, they might even have different names, whether it's joy, happiness. You know, we could even throw meaning into that kind of pot. But
right.
But the idea that happiness is this ecstatic experience of joy, I don't know that that's what happiness is.
Sure.
You know, everybody has those moments which are totally like out of this world happiness. But that isn't, you know, that isn't a norm. And I think that what we're talking about is what I'm going to call the baseline happiness.
Okay.
You know, which is kind of the standard everyday feeling of contentment that I experience.
Right. But we would still, in our definition of happiness, want these to be varying degrees of a similar thing.
Yeah, sure.
Which is feeling complete with one's portion. Now, tell me if this resonates with you, because I'm going to throw out a theory here, which is that on the one hand, happiness can come as a result of feeling like my portion is a greater part of a greater whole, right? Like the sniper in the army. Another way could be the following. When else are we happy with a portion? When else are we happy with only a portion? I'll give you an example. When you're making chocolate chip cookies, you use a portion of sugar in those cookies. If you used double or triple the amount, you'd get that cold, awful feeling on your teeth when you bite into a biscuit that's way too sugary. In that situation, having a part is enough. Having a part, not everything. I don't want all of the sugar in the world in my chocolate chip cookie recipe. I want a portion. In that recipe example, I'm okay, and I'm more than okay. I want only a portion, and that makes me complete.
Well, that's because of what you want. You want a cookie, you don't want sugar.
That's right. That's right.
Because if you did want sugar, then you wouldn't be happy with a portion that size. So again, it comes back to what is it that we want? What are we looking for? And that kind of defines or redefines what it is that goes into that pot,
right,
into that recipe.
So what I'm suggesting is there's like a microcosm of what we just said. The macrocosm is I, as a portion, my whole life is a chelik, a part of the whole. Well, what if the individual parts of my life are also a part of me, the whole? In that case, there are certain things that are in my life that if I look at it as a part of the whole, and my whole life is one contained unit, then I only need portions of this and portions of that in order to balance out the whole.
You know, it's so beautiful what you're saying, because really underlying what you're saying is that we should all be looking at our lives as interconnected, meaning everything in our life that's happening is all different parts of something greater, which is called life or my life or experience, right? Whereas usually we look at things that happen to us or our circumstances as all being separate, that one doesn't affect or in theory isn't connected to anything else. So I've got my job, I've got my family, I've got my financial circumstances, I've got my emotional makeup, I've got my friends and my family and my geography and and my leisure and all these different things, but they're not actually, they're just different things that happen to, by coincidence, be part of something called me.
Yes.
But really what we're doing here is, if I've understood you correctly, is saying that all of those things are not just things that happen to be in my life, they're all connected and they're all portions, they're all one ingredient in the great recipe of my life. And then if I can view them in the context or in the interplay with the other things together, then that gives each one of the separate ingredients a little bit more meaning.
That's the idea, man. That's the idea. And what that requires is just simply that perspective shift. There's certain things where the paradigm is the more the better. If you run a for-profit company, right? There's no such thing as going to your quarterly shareholders meeting and telling everyone, listen, everyone, I really apologize, but we've just made way too much money this quarter. Mm-hmm. No one would ever say that. So in that situation, you're never satisfied. You can always be making more money, right? But I think that if we shift our perspective from the for-profit organization to the chocolate chip cookie recipe, right? My life is not a for-profit organization. I'm not trying to produce the most output possible, right? What I'm trying to do is to create a whole recipe so that me, the chocolate chip cookie, comes out with a perfect balance, a perfect pinch of sugar and salt and flour and chocolate chips, right? I'm trying to figure out what the chocolate chips are in this metaphor.
Yeah, maybe that's for another time. You're making me hungry with all these analogies. I think we've got a really great idea here and potentially quite revolutionary. And it gets me thinking, I'm always trying to think like, what's the next question then? The next question really is, what is the right recipe? What is the combination of circumstances and ingredients in that dish, of life that is going to give us the greatest sense of happiness or meaning or joy or whatever we want to call it?
Right. Well, I'd say we could start with the following. You could reverse engineer your life. In other words, there are certain clues, I think, to understanding, well, what's the recipe that you're trying to make? What are you? Are you chocolate chip cookies or are you a lasagna, right? Well, it could be that if I look at my life and I see that I have, flat sheets of pasta and hamburger meat, so then I know that that's probably a good indication that I should be lasagna and not chocolate chip cookies, right? Whereas if somebody else has chocolate chips and flour and sugar, then they are meant to make chocolate chips. So maybe it's not always a question of saying, well, let me figure out what I want to bake. Maybe a lot of it is trying to figure out, well, what ingredients do I have to start with? That will definitely ensure that there's a greater chance that I'm going to be more successful at whatever it is that I'm trying to bake. So let me look back at my life and saying, well, what are my talents? What are my skills? What is my socioeconomic status and upbringing? And what's my childhood memories all about? And what are the things that I have to bring to the table? And then once I kind of list all those things out, then I can start to figure out, well, what's the recipe that needs to be made as a result of that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably why practices like mindfulness are so popular now, because really what it does is it's a tool to help us to take another look at ourselves, to check in with ourselves, so to speak, where we're looking at inside and we're saying, what am I experiencing? Who am I? What do I have? What are my ingredients, so to speak? And I don't think that we need to always just look back all the way to our childhood experiences, although they are going to be very, very informative to us for who we are now. But it's even a sense of, okay, I'm going to start again. What's a clean slate? Who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I struggle with? What am I just really good at? And that opportunity to check in with ourselves gives us a great platform to do that.
Yeah. When I said, by the way, childhood experiences, let me give you an example. I know I have a friend who's a psychologist, and the reason why he got into psychology is because he grew up with a mother who had schizophrenia. And rather than allow that to debilitate him, what it did was motivated him to say, well, I've gone through this and I've lived through it, and now I have the ability to help other people through it because I have had a firsthand experience of that. So, but I appreciate the kind of the comment that you're making about it, which is that we should always kind of not too much live in the past. Rather, we should kind of take stock of what our present is. Now, let me throw you the next question, which is, what you said at the beginning of this podcast, it is 2019, and the quest for happiness, the pursuit of happiness, is not a linear process, and it's something that applies differently in different generations. So now that we've kind of come to some at least rough understanding of what are the conditions for allowing for happiness, so what are the unique challenges today that stand in the way of achieving that?
Again, that's a tough question. I would initially start by saying a lot of it has to do with identity, with who we are, who we think we are, what do we stand for. The centuries that have gone past have had clear indicators of ideology, of a mission.
Right. Even a job, right?
Even a job, or even wartime gave people a sense of purpose and mission.
You knew which recipe you were meant to be.
100%. And now we're living in an age where so much has changed, and it's so rapidly changing that we're having to re-ask ourselves the question of who am I? And especially in the age of artificial intelligence and, all of the automation that's taking place. And
am I going to be irrelevant?
Are you going to be irrelevant? And the predictions that in however many years' time, probably not too many years' time, robots and artificial intelligence are going to take over most of human jobs.
Don't worry. Rabbis will always have a job.
Rabbis will always have a job. That's what you think.
Rabbi robots.
Rabbi robot will be taking over. But the question is really there. What is unique about humanity? And I think that's a question that we're struggling with in the 21st century, and it's one that we're beginning to struggle with now. And I think essentially it's a question of identity, because what makes me different, what makes me filled with meaning and purpose, what makes me unique, what makes me not irreplaceable, what makes me irreplaceable, not replaceable and disposable. And I think that question is central to answering, well, why haven't we achieved happiness in the 21st century, and what's changed? I would say that's changed. We've never been, faced with this existential kind of crisis of are we relevant? Are we still relevant?
Now you get me thinking, because you mentioned that we now have this kind of more of a blank slate in terms of defining our own. Meaning, it used to be that you were pigeonholed into a certain meaning, a certain recipe, right? You were drafted into the army at the age of 11, so you didn't have a choice. Or you were always going to be an apprentice to a blacksmith, and you had no choice into what profession you were going to do. Today, the whole world is thrown open. I don't know how you grew up, but, in the United States of America, it was the old popular phrase that your teachers would hammer into you can be anything you want to be. When in reality, I think what we're saying, what creates happiness is you must be everything that you could be. You're going to be you. You can't be everything you want to be, anything you want, right? Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have half the innate skills to be all those things. And furthermore, even if I did have a lot of talent growing up, for me to even think about the fact that I could have been 19 other things other than what I am now is also going to create a real struggle with what I actually do have. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one of them. The other one is the access to information about everything else that's out there. I used to, even if we compared ourselves to other people, it used to be that I would compare myself to, the butcher and the, the baker in my town, right? Candlestick maker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That guy too.
But today, it's all I have to do is scroll through my news feed, and then I can see anybody I ever knew, and every job that they're doing, and every venture that they're taking on, and now all of a sudden, right? So now I'm really struggling to figure out, well, what makes me me?
Well, I think that brings us kind of full circle as well, because the advent of social media and our access to seeing literally what everyone is doing, everyone we've ever met and all their friends, very often that kind of boomerangs back to us in a sense of, well, am I as good as them? Am I achieving as much as them? Am I as happy as them? Do I have as many good experiences as them? And why I think it brings us back full circle, because it's really touching again on this question of happiness. And is my happiness defined by things that are happening outside of me?
Right.
Or is my happiness something that exists innately within me? Something that I can switch on and something that I can switch off potentially, or is my happiness defined? We live in many ways the most revolutionary time in human history, and in many ways, the most distracted and the most scattered all over the place, time in human history as well, because there's more things happening in one day than ever in human history, and therefore, we're having to ask ourselves, am I doing as well as that guy? When people never had that question. They didn't necessarily define their happiness by what other people are doing. So again, it's this idea of, where is my sense of happiness coming from? Is it coming from a comparison to somebody else?
Right.
Or is it coming from, I'll give you a question. Imagine there was a salary review coming up. Right?
A what review?
A salary,
okay.
Wages review coming up, and everybody's getting a raise, and you wanted a raise of £1,000 and you got £2,000. So in an isolated, example, you would be so happy. Now imagine if you know that your colleague, your peer, who according to you does as much as you, imagine if they got twice the raise that you did. Mm-hmm. Would you be happy with your raise?
Yes. So the answer is obviously no, right?
Why?
You'd feel a sense of injustice.
You were happy.
You're absolutely right. But this is totally true. And plugging it back in, the antidote to that is saying, well, hold on a second. I mean, it could be that, again, I like this metaphor of the recipes, so humor me, right? It could be that your friend's recipe is, they're making frosting, which requires twice as much sugar as chocolate chip cookies, right? So maybe that's what they need right now, okay? And the fact is, and the reason why that's a helpful thing to think about is because whether or not you think that was just or unjust, that is totally outside of your control. What raise that you get. Meaning, if there is a sense of injustice and there's something you can do about it, then maybe you should do something about it, right? But in terms of the things that you're given, in terms of the things that happen to you, those now have to translate in your mind as, okay, that's now just part of the equation. Because otherwise you're going to be always wondering what if, and come up against the wall of, I have no control over that.
Right. Well, that's exactly the point, because, are we looking at things that happen to us, which are for the most part totally out of control? Or are we looking at what we have and what we can do with that?
Yeah.
Because, I always like to say that happiness doesn't come to you, it comes from you, right? And what I mean by that is that happiness isn't something that you experience because of things that are happening around you.
Right. It's almost despite those things.
It's despite or including the fact that they're happening.
Yes.
And happiness is something that is in our control. Now imagine that if we live a life which our happiness is in the control of others, whether they're other people or other circumstances or other events, then how our internal world, our mood, right, our contentment, is totally fluctuating at every moment. We have no control over it, because if that person says something, or if this person does something, if my happiness is affected every single time, then I'm just like spiraling out of control. And And I think that the real sense of inner happiness, happiness coming from you, is really predicated on the fact that we are in control of our inner state, of our inner world, and in control. We own our happiness, and that can't be taken away from anyone, by anyone, can't be taken away from us. And that's this sense of having contentment and peace of mind.
So let me just recap here what we've got so far, because the question that I threw at you, a few minutes ago was, well, how is the happiness question unique in our generation? And it sounds like what we've got so far is two things, essentially. One is a distraction from the inner self. We no longer have a clear idea of that meaning that we're meant to accomplish, and therefore, if I have no recipe to go on, so I don't even know if I've gotten there yet, right? If I don't know what my purpose is, what my function is, then how can I have achieved that? How can I feel any sense of completion? That's number one. Number two is, further distracting me from that is all the things that are happening outside and around me. There's so much more stimulus now, so many of other people's lives and stories that are being thrown at me, that it's confusing me even more about what my unique story is about to be. And I let that control me from the outside as well. So what we're seeing is an attack from the inside and an attack from the outside. And that might be two of the areas where we are uniquely challenged in the 21st century.
Nicely put.
Sounds good so far?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so what do we do? What do we do? I think one thing that you mentioned was just, again, more mindfulness, more self-awareness. The more I take stock of the things that I have, and the more I attribute that to, and instead of trying to say, what are all the conditions that I need to happen in order for me to get to that place of happiness, rather reverse engineer. Say, what do I have right now? What can I make from that?
You know, I just to refine that, I always say to people that I'm talking to about this is the practice is about familiarizing yourself with the real you.
Yes.
You know, we all have this experience of who is the real me. We have those moments of clarity. We have those moments of being totally connected to ourselves, and to cling on to those moments. Right? That's the real you, because we get lost and we get flustered with all that's going on, and we forget who the real me is. And the more that we're in touch with the real me, the more we can be in control of our own happiness.
Amen to that, brother. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. I think that maybe this is a good place to kind of put a little ... on the conversation and say, look, there's a lot more to discuss, obviously. Happiness is a never-ending subject. And we also raised an interesting question about identity, which might be something that we may want to revisit in the future. But at least until now, we've gotten a relatively good definition. And I think that allows us to just begin to put things into a framework. Once we start placing things in boxes and you start to say, you look at the things in your life and you're saying, is this bringing me back to the real me? Is this helping me take control and take ownership of who I really am and what I'm really meant to be doing? Or is it taking me away? Is it confusing me? Is it distracting me? Is it making me want to be someone else or something else, right? That way you can start to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, of the things in your life, right? That sounds to me like a huge step in the right direction. So, that's a pretty good step in the right direction. I think if we end off, my closing remark would just be that it's an incredible paradox to be whole with your part. To me, that was profoundly life-changing, and I constantly seek to look at the parts in my life as part of a greater whole of myself, or the part of me that's part of a greater whole in the world. So hopefully everyone's able to come to terms with that part and see that part is really the only part that they need.
Absolutely, and that part is where we have to look to in order to find our happiness and to remind ourselves that happiness doesn't come to you; it comes from you.
As always, Rabbi Ari, an absolute pleasure to have
Pleasure was mine.
A deep and meaningful conversation. We hope everyone listening has enjoyed and has gotten something and learned something new today. And hopefully we'll see you next time.